Hi there, English 123. It's me, Adam. And what I have come to talk to you guys today about is my final project. It's been an amazing year. I've absolutely loved it. I've learned a lot of stuff. And what's a final project if not demonstrating the knowledge that you've learned and how you're going to utilize that in the future? Wow, Adam, tell me how you're going to utilize this in the future. Well, unknowing bystander, let me explain. You see, I've been writing poetry for about 2 years now. I took this class to learn some of the technical aspects as to how to write poetry. Throughout this year, like all year, I've continued writing my poetry and have been using a lot of the concepts we've been learning in class in the poetry that I've been writing. But Adam, how does this apply to your final project? Well, I'll tell you. My final project, what I'm going to be doing this year is I'm going to be running through a lot of the concepts that we've gone over in this class and how they've affected my writing over this past year. The first thing you learn about poetry is simply the different styles that people utilize. You're going to find poetry split into two main types. The first is free verse. The most defining characteristic of free verse poems is that there's no necessary rhyme pattern or syllable pattern. There's none of it. So, to demonstrate this kind of poetry, this first poem is titled Stars. Looking up at the black-lit sky is a good time to think about things. How small we really are is one thought, how little we are compared to the galaxy. But we never really think about the stars. We take whole universes and make them into shapes. Constellations are formed by the entirety of millions upon billions of existences, and we only notice them because they look like a belt when we put them together. You think looking at the stars makes you feel insignificant? Think about how the stars feel. None of the lines were necessarily equal in length or rhymed in any particular pattern. The second type of poem we're going to be looking at is rhyming. Rhyming poems, quite simply, have a rhyme scheme. These more typically do have some kind of meter or rhythm to them. They are what makes up most of my personal poetry style. The following poem is written actually entirely in rhyme, and its title is Depression. Fear, tears, beer, cheers. More shots, poor thoughts. Contemplate fate, state irate. Sad lad, dad's mad. Bad times, rad rhymes. Spit it, nitwit. Speaking, leaking, words absurd. Timing, deriving, rhyming, conniving. Why write? My fight. Poet's fame? No, it's pain. That poem there was a classic example of the most basic type of rhyme, end rhyme. The last syllable of every single word sounds exactly the same. That's what makes it rhyme. This was also a classic example of something called a couplet. Two lines following each other that rhyme together. Next, we're going to be looking into the two different types of line separation. These two types are called end stop and enjambment. End stop is when the natural rhythm of the line culminates at the end of the line. Enjambment is a line where the natural rhythm runs into the next line. This normally results from a lack of punctuation at the end of the first line. For an example of both of these types of line separations, I have an excerpt from one of my poems titled One Old House. One old house sitting by itself. An old crack-backed black house, a lackluster tacky shack, a wacky sack of used parts and time gone by. No one lives in this house. It's silent and dreary, nearly falling over after rearing its ugly head for so many years. Teary-eyed, I leer at this house, fearing it will collapse with every creak, no doubt. Appearing to slouch, I crouch over now. I don't want to grouch, but look at its bow. Kneeling over, nearly falling in on itself. I really have a feeling that its shelf life is nearly shelved. As you can see, some of the lines in this poem had a natural rhythm stoppage at the end of each line, while at the same time, some of the lines continued right into the next one. And now that we've gone through some of the baseline tools needed to construct a poem, we can start looking at some of the poetic techniques that poets use in those poems. Two examples of these kind of techniques is the metaphor and the simile. The simile is a comparison of two unlike things utilizing the words like or as, where the metaphor is a comparison of, again, two unlike things without using the words like or as. To give an example of a simile, this next poem is titled Like My Heart Is. My mindset is set like my heart is open. The door is ajar and doesn't need to be broke in. My life's full of love, it's a lovely emotion, but being in love, that's a whole different devotion. That special someone is a very rare token, a sleeping beast that's hardly woken. I'll find them, I will, I know, I'm hoping. Till then I'm left like my heart is, broken. And to give an example of a metaphor in my poetry, I have this example from my poem, A Letter for Help. Dear friends, it'll be tough to say, but I'll articulate. Call it cruelty, my cruel fate. I nurtured words, but now they've turned. I watched my world around them burn. I would educate with my eloquent epilogues and my element, but now those thoughts are all forgotten. On my own, my thoughts downtrodden. A cat's got my tongue, a feline fiend, and I fear the feline is my rhyme scheme. I shredded my soliloquies and my speeches, my slam poems, sonnets, and spoken word pieces, but I'm permanently placed in my word purgatory, gabbing and glossing over the gray walls' gray glory. I can try to escape, but there's no use fighting. When I try to crawl over, the walls just heighten. When I speak without rhyme, my thoughts go blank. Watch, I'll try. Here goes. Thanks. As you can see by the highlighted metaphors and similes from the last two pieces, this poetic technique is used to convey things about certain objects that you wouldn't necessarily understand about them by themselves. Two other poetic techniques that poets often use in their works are the concepts of assonance and alliteration. Both of these are utilized to create a semblance of rhythm in the piece. Assonance is the repetition of a single vowel sound in a series of words, whereas alliteration is the repetition of a single consonant sound. For my example of utilizing assonance, I have an excerpt here from my poem titled Poetry. Poetry. A poor retreat where poor men meet to preach the streets of roaming feet. Pass your message along, whatever it may be. From Greenpeace to graffiti, or that we need to teach peace to repeat the treaty to prevent breeding the greed of the greedy. Our words have worth and can raise the spirits of those who are beaten and needy. Whether they come from up in the sky or down on this earth, each word has wisdom that is just waiting to unearth. There are millions of convoluted, complicated combinations of commands and comments to communicate to this earth that this means something. And my condolences if you can't comprehend, but my compliments if you can contemplate that. And for an example for alliteration, I have an excerpt from my poem titled Who I Am. The more you get to know me, I'm a complicated guy. I shrink away from bees and from confrontation. I think outside the box and let my contemplation fly. The things I can't explain, I let my communication try. My poetry is more to see than rhythmic rumblings. It's core to me and sure to be, curing my troublings. I'll keep typing trepid text because the text is humbling, and I'll twist tongue twisters till my tongue is stumbling. Both of these techniques added rhythm to the poems that they were included in. The last type of poetic technique we already touched on a little bit earlier. Rhyme. We already touched on end rhyme, and although there is some other types of rhyme that I use less often in my poetry, two examples that I took away from this class that I use a lot are internal rhyme and slant rhyme. Internal rhyme is rhyme that you find in the middle of the line, whereas slant rhyme is just imperfect rhyme. Rhyme that either ends in the same vowel or the same consonant, but not both. My example for internal rhyme comes from my poem Complication. I can't believe all the obscene things that I have seen. The world is hard, we all have scars, life's a complicated scene. For everyone we love has something they would never share, and every dove has a skeleton hidden in somewhere. Although contradictions, the fact and fiction, are both equal in depiction, for with any affliction no word or diction is a full and apt description. Try to describe a mirror as it describes you, and think about which side turns out to be the version true. Nothing is quite nearly as right as it appears to me. A magic hat pulls rabbits from that which couldn't possibly be. To try to comprehend, you can't depend on your perception's own, so just relax and enjoy the facts, but if you trust them, maybe don't. My last example for you today comes from my poem, The Story of Success, highlighting my use of slant rhyme in the piece. The story of success is an education epilogue, learning to speak, computate multiplication in logs, splitting and splicing start dissections of frogs, saying, dictating, debating class discussions long, confusing computations on complicated computers, commissioned by command to confused commuters. Comparatively, it surely could become worse. I could be stammering stanzas, speaking, sounding out verse. I could be ill-advised, ill-prepared, illogical, and illiterate, eliciting illegible Iliads to illustrate, illuminate the problems here in the USA. We swing for the bleachers, but don't watch out for home plate. We gotta take care of us before we can succeed. Our education's what we got and what will construct me. I'm the future. Founding fathers, feel free to chime in. The American dream, here's its bandwagon, climb in. The story of success has a moral, here's the truth. The home of the brave ones are the youth. Lean on us, and in kind we will respond, but with our current education, I'll be kind, dream on. Similar to assonance and alliteration, these different types of rhymes add rhythm to each piece that they're in. In English 123 this year, we didn't learn simply one type of poetry. Whether free verse or rhyming, with lines that are end-stopped or jammed, and with any poetic technique that you can think of. We've touched on them all. Over the course of this year, I've learned to harness these different poetic techniques and styles of poetry to help enhance my own poetry. I hope, through watching these past clips, that you're able to see the different aspects of poetry that I've learned from this class and how I utilize them in my own works today.